Watch television in the evening, the news, all you see are advertisements for Alzheimer's drugs that do not work. So I think the message is to embrace the notion of preventive medicine as it relates to the brain, and that's the message everyone has to get.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we've done so much research, billions and billions of dollars of research on Alzheimer's, over 400 published studies on reversal trials on drugs. And 99.6% of them don't work. And the ones that work delay the progression of Alzheimer's such that you'll spend 3 months more at home before you go to the nursing home.
This is the dirty little secret that shouldn't get out. Because what has to happen is a miracle drug needs to be developed so that it can be monetized. That's how the system works. And the idea that our lifestyle choices, which don't cost anything, can prevent the very disease that's costing us in this country $230 billion a year, that message can't get out.
Scientists now call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. What's the link between Alzheimer's and diabetes? Well, new research shows that insulin resistance is now one of the major factors that starts the brain damage cascade, which robs the memory of over half of people heading into their 80s, leading to the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Here's the bad news, good news. Eating sugar and refined carbs can cause pre-dementia and also dementia. But cutting out the sugar and refined carbs and adding lots of good fats can prevent and even reverse pre-dementia and early dementia.
There have been randomized control trials, which is hard data, showing that when you consume more fat in the form of nuts or extra virgin olive oil, it actually leads to improved brain health outcomes in terms of cognitive function. Cognitive function is improved and things like that.
You mentioned sugar, and you mentioned sugar in the brain. We talked about Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes. How is this impacting the brain, and what should we do about it? And also, I want you to touch on the title of your book, which is Grain Brain. And are grains included in this, or is it just sugar? And should we be eating any grains?
Well, there are a lot of questions there. I'd say, first of all, there are some grains that I think are not necessarily threatening. And I think that if you can find a non-GMO corn, or you want to eat some quinoa, which by definition is not necessarily a grain, but everybody talks about it as if it were. The issues with grain are twofold. It's their carb content and the fact that they contain gluten, in my opinion. There are other issues as well. We know that wheat is, although it is not genetically modified in America, is still sprayed with an herbicide called glyphosate, which is powerfully threatening to the gut bacteria, as the work of Dr. Stephanie Seneff has made very clear to us.
Roundup.
Roundup, you got it. And that's a powerful threat to the microbiome. It has insinuated itself into so many foods. It is the largest global herbicide in terms of its use, 1.35 million metric tons being sprayed on our food and animals' food around the globe, threatening the soil microbiome, threatening the microbiome in you and me, and it needs to stop. As we've learned from one of our mentors, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, food is information. And it means that the foods we eat are changing the expression of our DNA. That's a heady notion.
Cognitive decline and memory loss can be prevented and even reversed. We simply have to optimize brain function, and then we can see miracles. I've seen this happen many times in my medical practice. I first began to realize that dementia was not a fixed problem when I had a patient come in to me named Bud. And Bud was about 70 years old. He ran a large corporation of his own family business, and his wife said he was increasingly dysfunctional. He had to stop working. He was highly depressed. He couldn't remember anything. And he was told he had dementia and was on a slippery slope to death, and that he should get his affairs in order. And I said, well, maybe there's something else going on. And it was really the first case I'd seen, and I'd said, well, let me just try some of the principles based on the theory of how the body actually works. We addressed his nutrition and his sugar in his diet. We made sure he had adequate levels of B vitamins. We made sure we got rid of the mercury in his body by getting rid of his fillings and getting the mercury out of his system through chelation and IV therapy. We also gave him treatment for his gut and got his gut functioning again. So all these things were dynamically interacting, and we corrected all of them. And it was like Rip Van Winkle. He came back to work, he was functional, he was happy, he has memory back. It wasn't 100%, but he was really back into a normal functioning life, and you wouldn't know anything if you talked to him. If you looked at an autopsy of a brain of a patient with Alzheimer's, you'd see a brain on fire. This inflammation occurs over and over again in every chronic disease, and very dramatically.
So there may be a number of links between leaky gut and Alzheimer's, but an obvious one is that with leaky gut, you produce a state of chronic inflammation. And inflammation, unquestionably, is pro-Alzheimer's. For example, just the activation of NF-kappa B, one of the inflammatory mediators, some of the genes that this affects turn out to be the very ones that cleave the amyloid precursor protein to produce the amyloid. So you are putting yourself in a pro-Alzheimer's state if you have chronic inflammation. And leaky gut is a great way to produce chronic inflammation. In addition, of course, you end up with fragments of bacteria that actually end up in the brain. You can see them sticking literally at the site of the amyloid plaques.
Poisoning with heavy metals, such as mercury and other toxins, and the importance of detoxification is not something we learn about in medical school. So we have very few tools to address this toxic exposure, which is contributing to many of the health epidemics we see in today's world. Once we start looking a little deeper, the effects of toxins are not hard to document. Thankfully, though, the human organism has an extraordinary capacity for resiliency, for regeneration, recovery, and renewal. I've seen this over and over, not only in relation to my own mercury toxic brain and its recovery, but also in the recovery of many patients with depression, behavior problems, ADHD, autism, dementia, and Parkinson's disease. So even if you haven't been treated for toxins that you have certainly been exposed to, there is still hope, even in extreme cases. When you actually deal with the root causes and then you optimize the body's function with Parkinson's, people can have dramatic improvements in their well-being. I just talked to a patient today who has Parkinson's, and he was exposed at very young ages to all sorts of pesticides. When you're a kid, they used to have the pesticide trucks spraying the neighborhoods, and the kids would run through the pesticide fog. And he had exposure and occupational exposures and many, many other exposures, and he had Parkinson's. And so we found he had exposures to organophosphate pesticides in his urine. We found DDE, which has been banned for decades from DDT, and still he had these in his system. So we were able to actually treat him, and within a very short time, using saunas and mitochondrial nutrients and things to help him detoxify, within a few days he said he was very much better. We now know that you can maintain a healthy cognitive status well into your 90s, 100. I have a friend who had his dad who's 105, is still sharp as a tack and lives by himself. So the body is capable of that. And the question is, why are some people able to do that and others not? It's because of the number of insults and stresses and toxins that we're all exposed to, poor diet. That affects our brain function dramatically. Most people know that you can change your environment to reduce toxins by eating organic food, filtering your water, avoiding mercury-containing fish and vaccines, avoiding dental fillings with mercury, and much more. But most people don't think you can change your genes. Well, you can. In fact, you influence your genes with every bite of food you eat, every thought you think. So if you were born with genes that make you predisposed to this or that problem, you can work around them. You can help them do a better job and prevent disease or other health problems. You can boost your ability to detoxify by turning on the right genes and turning off the wrong genes. You can help by giving them everything they need to do a good job, such as the right vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. For example, eating 2 cups of kale or cabbage will supercharge your detox system and the genes that control it. Though you may have been dealt a certain genetic hand, it is what you do with that hand that determines the course of your life and your health.
67-year-old woman, one of the wealthiest women in Canada, was at early stages of dementia. Having brain fog, her memory was spotty, her skin was dry, she was having trouble sleeping, all these problems going on. She was very worried. She thought she was basically losing her mind and her life was going away. So she came to see me. I tested her, super high levels of mercury. I put her on my mercury detox program. So what I did with her was I gave her a gentle drug called DMSA, only 250 milligrams every 3rd night. So not very often, so we wouldn't get a toxicity from the drug. In addition, I gave her 2.5 grams of fiber a day. In this case, it was PGX. I gave her 2.5 grams of fiber twice a day to help improve the absorption of the toxins. And then every day, I had her take N-acetylcysteine, or NAC for short, 500 milligrams. And the reason I gave her NAC is that it increases glutathione production in the body. And the glutathione is our most important antioxidant for protection from toxins and for getting toxins out of the body. I gave her the fiber so it absorbed the toxins that are being dumped from the gut. And I gave her the DMSA because it very effectively binds to mercury and to lead and gets them out of the body both through the urine and through the gut. So what happened? 6 months later, she said, I'm starting to feel better. My brain's starting to work better. 1 year later, she said, wow, I think I can get over this. A year and a half later, her mercury went from 50, which is super high, to 33.5, which is very low. All her symptoms were gone.
Functional medicine, we look upstream. What's the cause? So what's the cause of the amyloid? It's not just the genes, because genes can be turned on or off, and genes can be expressed in different ways depending on the inputs of the environment, diet, lifestyle, toxins. So with the amyloid, what is driving the production of all this amyloid in these patients?
In the brain, amyloid has to get seeded. And in those rare cases of early onset Alzheimer's, those mutations cause a longer version of that amyloid protein that seeds amyloid more rapidly.
So that's like a genetic cause.
That's a genetic cause in this 1 or 2% of cases.
Yeah.
But that's not happening in 98, 99% of cases. So you have to ask, I say based on that, you then have to ask logically, what's seeding, like this, like a crystallization event, right? What's seeding amyloid when you don't have more of that longer form of amyloid protein like they have in the rare early onset genetic cases? And what we figured out over the last 10 years is that pathogenic microbes, bacteria, yeast, viruses, may be doing the seeding of the plaques, where the plaques are actually forming to protect the brain against those microbes. The brain is not sterile. If you try to look for bacteria and yeast and viruses, you do find them in the brain. And when it comes to certain viruses, we see more of them in Alzheimer's brain, and we think that might be a major culprit. We used to believe that the brain didn't have a lymphatic system.
Yeah.
Right? Now it does. So everything we believed about the brain, no lymphatic system, wrong. Completely sterile, wrong. Right? And the way the brain accumulates microbes is, you could have the blood-brain barrier integrity go down, so they come in from the blood, and that can happen with age. The blood-brain barrier integrity starts to go downhill. In fact, the gut microbiome is what helps to keep that blood-brain barrier.
And what the research is really showing is that it's really systemic inflammation, that any inflammation in the body turns on brain inflammation. And for people that have like chronic inflammatory diseases, like if they have irritable bowel syndrome or some type of autoimmune disease, that chronic inflammation releases inflammatory messengers, and they actually turn on brain inflammation. So when you look at brain inflammation, it's really susceptible to anything that triggers an inflammatory response, whether it's chemical exposures, food reactions, an inflammatory disease, blood sugar elevations like diabetes. All those things tend to turn on the inflammatory cascade in the brain.
Low blood flow, #1 predictor of Alzheimer's disease. So if you have things like hypertension, heart disease, erectile dysfunction, you're not exercising, that's a predictor of trouble. So exercise and ginkgo and vinpocetine, 2 supplements I like a lot, and eating things like beets can be really helpful.
Exercise does really profound things to the brain. And I think one of the secrets of exercise is that it's affecting so many different systems. It affects heart rate and blood flow. It affects oxygen levels. And one of the things that we know that is really key is that it affects the levels of growth factors that are in particular very important parts of the brain. 2 key areas are an area critical for long-term memory called the hippocampus. We know that there's increased growth factors there. And a second key brain area important for focusing and shifting your attention, that is the prefrontal cortex. So there are many different effects, and I have to say that I don't think we understand the full range of all the different physiological changes that happen in our brain with exercise, but that's just a few of them that happens that cause things like changes in neurotransmitter levels that improve your mood, and changes in these growth factors that actually improve the function of both long-term memory as well as attention.
You found all kinds of extraordinary things that are all things that actually help to optimize the brain, heal the brain, renew the brain, and also prevent problems down the road. Can you tell us a little bit about that research?
Yeah, we did a clinical trial where you had 30 people learning to meditate, 30 expert meditators who were teaching them, and then another 30 people who were just staying at the same resort, having fun, but eating the same food. So we had a control for the diet, right? Yeah. And what we found was that the folks who were learning to meditate had changes in the right direction for genes involved with inflammation. We looked at the whole expression of all the genes in the genome and built maps. And they were very different for the meditation group versus the resort group. In both cases, resort was good for you. You saw nice changes in genes involved with inflammation.
So having a vacation is good.
Yeah, so vacation was good. But meditation was much better. So with meditation, you saw changes in like the anti-aging enzyme telomerase that grows the ends of your chromosomes, that keeps your cells dividing longer. There was a 40% increase in telomerase activity in the expert meditators who were meditating intensively all week. There were changes in the genes involved with Alzheimer's and how amyloid protein is cleared from the brain that were also in the right direction.
Sleep apnea triples the risk of Alzheimer's disease. On scans, it makes you look like, your brain looks like you have Alzheimer's disease, because your brain is the most oxygen-hungry organ in the body.
Power of functional medicine has transformed the lives of many, including my friend and colleague, Dr. Terry Walls. Now, you were in a wheelchair, and it was only a one-way street, worse.
As in a wheelchair, I couldn't sit up anymore. I was in a zero-gravity chair where I was fully reclined, knees higher than my nose. I struggled to walk 10 feet using 2 walking sticks. I was losing my keys, my phone. I had the severe MS pain, was having to go to the pain clinic, take frequent Solu-Medrol to try and control the pain.
Powerful steroids.
So life was very tough. And that's where I was in 2007. In 2008, after doing my diet and lifestyle protocol, I was able to do a 20-mile bike ride with my family. That's how much transformation had happened in that 12-month period.
So tell us, why are the mitochondria so important in neurodegenerative disease?
Well, the mitochondria are the little bacteria that were engulfed by bigger bacteria about 1.5 billion years ago. And they were very efficient at converting energy from the food we ate into the biochemical energy that our cells use. And that would allow cells to become multicellular, to develop organs, tissues, locomotion. It would let us develop brains, hearts, retinas, etc. And the cells that need the most energy, which are our brain cells, our retina, and our heart cells, have like 10,000 mitochondria per cell.
Yeah, and the heart has, I think, 17,000, right?
So it's just so critical. And if your mitochondria are not working very well, then that organ doesn't work very well. And so in the brain, that means that you begin to have problems with fatigue, with pain, with irritability, with cognitive decline. And so, that was actually one of the first things I discovered when I'd gone back to start reading the science, was that mitochondria were at the heart of neurodegeneration for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Lou Gehrig's.
So how do you take care of your mitochondria? How do you recover your mitochondria?
So there are 3 things that I think about. The first one is what's the nutritional need for that mitochondria? This mitochondria has a lot of cell membrane, which means it has a lot of fat. So you need the right fats, a lot of omega-3s, omega-6 fats to make healthy membranes. You need a lot of B vitamins, and that's essentially the whole B vitamin family to support some of those enzymatic steps. You need a bunch of minerals like zinc, magnesium as cofactors for a lot of those B vitamins, some sulfur amino acids as well, antioxidants. So there's really important nutrition that you need for those mitochondria. The next thing you need to think about is Why did the mitochondria begin to not function very well? The most common reason is that they've been poisoned, and it can be poisoned by things like heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic. Pesticides will do that. The insecticides will do that. Some plastics and solvents. So poisoning is the most common thing. And then the third category would be some of the stealth infections, where an infectious particle has sort of hijacked the mitochondria and taken it away from manufacturing energy to manufacturing viral particles. So address those three factors, and you'll go far in restoring that mitochondrial health. There are more and more papers identifying that you have a different mix of bacteria living in your gut if you've got an autoimmune condition than if you're healthy. As they eat our food and each other's byproducts, they're secreting compounds that cross over into the blood, and then into the blood-brain barrier, and can increase inflammation. They can shift behavior. They can shift our mood, can shift our cognition. So that's clearly having an impact on the brain. Now, in terms of the mitochondria, one thing that they can do is, I believe about 25% of our detoxification capabilities are managed by our gut microbiome. And so if you have a healthy, vigorous microbiome, a health-promoting bacteria, you'll have improved detoxification, and you'll have less poisoning of your mitochondria.
Remember, these conditions are not a normal part of aging. Taking preventive measures is absolutely key. In our next episode, we will talk to experts about ADHD and autism. We'll discuss why conventional approaches to these brain disorders are often failing us, and we'll also talk about the root causes of ADHD and autism and what we can do about them. See you there.